Hello, everybody. I think we're live, and I am in the basement in our workout area. It's a little bit messy, but we're having some work done upstairs, and I came downstairs to just to do the recording down here and the live, just to make it hopefully easier to hear me and not hear any kind of louder noises upstairs. So, welcome. We're on day 4 of our 5 days to your most successful run and try season yet. I hope you guys are having a great day. Please let me know if you're here. Say hi so I can say hi. Please ask any questions. Hey, Doug. Hope you're having a great day. Thanks for joining live. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, you guys. And if you catch the video later, just make sure you put your questions underneath the video thread or tag me so I know that you had a question. Just because the whole Facebook algorithm, they don't always show you everything. So I want to make sure if you guys do have questions that I actually can see them and know you have them. And I realized that yesterday I forgot to email out the recording and the guidebook for day 3. So today I'm going to email out in one email the day 3 and day 4 video and guidebook for anyone that gets it via email or wants to participate via email. So we are talking about endurance training today, and kind of like the bread and butter of just as an athlete, as a runner, as a triathlete, most people think to themselves, this is the main thing I need to do. I just need to train. And this is kind of like where I feel like it sets me apart just a little bit as a coach, is that I think we have all those other pieces, like the daily nutrition and the mindset and the injury prevention. And then tomorrow is going to be on sports specific, like race nutrition. So often it's just like this day today, the endurance training that people focus on, whereas I think it's really important to have all 5 or 6 pillars to focus on. Excuse me, I still have my cough, unfortunately. This bronchitis, pneumonia, whatever it's been, just won't leave my lungs, so I apologize for coughing for you guys. But let's talk about so endurance training. The biggest things I'm going to talk about, the biggest problems I'm seeing, and then how I, as a coach, over the last 10 plus years of coaching, how I have kind of figured out what works best for the majority of athletes. So we'll go through kind of some of the things I'm seeing that's going wrong for a lot of athletes, and then how to make those changes. So the biggest things I see go wrong when athletes are training for endurance races is a couple things. So one, they start training without a plan. And when you first start off training, this can be okay because it's all about just getting your body used to putting in the miles on the bike, the run, the swim. You're just kind of getting yourself used to training. But once you have, a fairly decent, base, and you're kind of like, all right, now I'm training, it's really important to follow a plan. Because if you're not following a plan, then you tend to do too much on certain days, maybe too many days in a row, not taking enough recovery days. There's no rhyme or reason to your training, and that tends to create problems, especially developing injuries, or you're just kind of stagnating because you're kind of just doing the same thing day in and day out without any given plan. So number one mistake is, not having a plan. So to remedy that, you're going to have a plan. That could be a plan from a coach, like myself, like a one-on-one coach. Could be a training plan, like those that are on our team that use a stock plan, or like ones that I've custom created. Could be a book, a magazine, an online, like something like from Pinterest. I've had athletes like runners grab a marathon plan from there. Just grab a plan that is hopefully a science-based plan that has shown to be beneficial, where it has like certain things in it, like we'll talk about periodized training, we'll talk about recovery days. You'll want to have a plan that has all of those things in it, or a coach that has the kind of the wherewithal to understand all of that. But start with a plan. That's going to be number one. Number two is, when you have a plan, when you have a coach, in whatever capacity that it is, I want you to trust that plan, trust that coach. And if you don't trust that plan or don't trust that coach, I want you to find someone else that you do trust. So as you're looking for coaches, unfortunately there are quite a number of coaches out there who I've had athletes come to me after telling me kind of what their experience was. It was less than stellar. And if you have a coach out there that you're not meshing with, or is not providing you the help or communication, or maybe you feel like is maybe just overtraining you, you need to say something to that coach or find a different coach that is going to follow kind of that science-based protocol that we're talking about. So if you don't trust your coach, try to find a different coach that you can trust. But once you have a coach that you're like, I trust this coach, or this is a great plan, I know it's worked before, and if you start to find yourself going, but maybe I'll add in a little bit of extra work here, or maybe I'll skip that recovery day, or maybe I should just do this, that's when we start to build ourselves into a hole. We start to kind of dig ourselves in and say, like, instead of like following that plan, we're thinking that we have the best, kind of like we know more, or we are kind of like we just feel like, oh, maybe we should do more. And I think that's the biggest thing I see the athletes tend to kind of get wrong, is if there's no coach like looking over their shoulder, like in Training Peaks saying, what are you doing? What was that extra workout? Or did you go harder than you were supposed to? Because most of the time it's athletes believing that they need to push harder, push more often, just do more than the plan or the coach says, and that can lead to overtraining. It can lead to injury, burnout, and I've had many athletes come to me over the years after they've been burned out saying, can you help me figure out how to work myself out from this state of overtraining to being back to this healthy athlete that I want to be? And it's super common, and unfortunately I've seen it a lot, so I really prefer to help you guys before you get to that point. So if you have any questions, please let me know on on a plan, coaching. Just, I don't want you to get to that point where you're not trusting the plan, you're not trusting the coach, and you're in that overtraining kind of zone, because it can take a long time to build yourself out of that zone. Just as a quick story, there was an athlete I knew in Oregon when we lived there, and he decided to race 3 Ironman in a year. He didn't have a plan, didn't have a coach, just did whatever workouts he felt like doing, and he pretty much raced an Ironman every other month. And after that, he was so overtrained, so burnt out, that he actually had to take 2 years off of racing, because his hormone levels tanked. He had absolutely no energy. He had really just dug himself into this big hole, and it really just changed his whole outlook. He realized that this is just not how I want to be, and it took him a long time to heal and get back there. And that might be a story that you're like, that's not going to happen to me, or I'm not racing 3 Ironman in a year, or that's just, that's a lot, and I'm not there. But it's just to show you that he's a very smart athlete, a very gifted athlete, and he just took that too far. So have a coach, a plan, trust that coach, trust that plan, and then if you're finding yourself feeling like I'm getting overtrained, go ahead and stop and ask for help. Okay, and then so that's pretty much, I'd say, the biggest mistakes I'm seeing athletes making, would be the not having a plan, or if they have a plan, not following the plan, not listening to their coach, if they have a coach, or having a coach that maybe is not listening to them, or giving them workouts that are just not science-based. So think about, is that me? Have I done that before? Do I see any of those things that I'm saying? Like, do you notice any of those and kind of in your own, in how your own mindset is? Or do you tend to be someone that's going to always try to do more, or just sneak in another workout, and really start to think to yourself, is this in my best interest? Because generally it's not. The way that the body works physiologically is we want to, push and push and push and then recover. And if we push, we end up pushing into that overtraining zone or overreaching zone, or into zones that, some people would have called it, like now we call it red S, because that incorporates both men and women when we're, say, not eating enough and we're overtraining and the body just can't keep up. And it sends us into this overtraining state where our hormones are just, tanked, and it takes a long time for our body to work back to that state. So how do we have good endurance training? How do we make sure our running and our triathlon training is what we want? So number one, I touched on this a little bit yesterday with injury prevention, but we want to have periodized training. So periodized training is where we are having different phases. So base phase is kind of like you're building your aerobic engine. Then you have your build phase, which build phase to me is where you're starting to build more race-specific intensities, race-specific distances. You're going harder efforts. It's just you're building your body's just ability to withstand this training that you're doing. It's just kind of the next step after base. Then we come to peak, which is, for me as a coach, this is where my athletes are doing their most challenging workouts. They are pushing their body, probably a little bit overreaching, but then we recover to make sure they're not going to get overtrained or injured. And then we are going to taper, which reduces our body's load, our training load, brings our inflammation down, makes us ready to hit our taper into our race day. Okay, so following a periodized plan is the best thing to do. If you guys are following a plan online or in a book, most of the time, I'm fairly certain most coaches are now going to have periodized training. But if you're finding a program or a plan or a coach that doesn't seem to have any sort of rhyme or reason to why they're doing workouts, just start to question that and start to say, like, what's the purpose of this training block? What's the purpose of this week, of this workout? Because you want to have a purpose for every workout, every week, every period, like every block, every month. There should be a goal for that week, that month, that cycle, building towards your race. Okay, and when we look at that period, whether it's a day, a week, a month, a block, we want to have that period being broken into different styles of workouts. So this is going to be in the guidebook, so don't worry if you can't remember like what I'm saying. You can just find it in the guidebook. But each week you're going to want to have a kind of an overall arching theme of 80-20, meaning 80% of the time you're doing aerobic work that's going to be building your aerobic engine. Whether you're a runner or a triathlete, you're going to be spending time, in your aerobic zone where your heart and lungs are going to be getting stronger. You're just you're doing like longer miles, you're working on technique, things that are going to really just make your engine stronger. Then 20% of the time, you're going to be doing high intensity intervals. This is where you're going to be throwing in, your, fartleks into your, intervals on the track, into your, biking. You're going to be doing a lot of higher intensity intervals. Now that certainly still does build your aerobic engine, but then we're reaching into anaerobic, which anaerobic is where you're using different fuel. So it's a different, I'm not going to get too technical for you guys, but a different fuel substrate. It's going to be a little more challenging on your muscles than say an aerobic workout is going to be. But we want to first build your aerobic base about 80% of the time, whether you're looking at that week or that month, and then 20% of the time we're doing that intensity. If you guys are feeling like, wow, if I'm working out 6 days a week, and maybe you have 12 workouts a week, and I feel like, if 6 of those workouts are high intensity and 6 are going to be more of like an aerobic, that's too much. You want to stick with that 80-20 rule, meaning 80% of the time aerobic, it shouldn't feel like you're dying, and then 20% of the time you're going to be pushing it hard, and those workouts are really going to take that fitness to the next level. But when we have that 20%, if we're doing more than that, we tend to fall into that overreaching category, and we tend to kind of hit towards like the risk of injury is going to go up. Okay, so does that make sense? Any questions, you guys, on 80-20, kind of the periodized training, anything with kind of picking a plan or a coach or anything before we go on to, I'm going to break it into triathlon and then running, kind of like some things I like to do in each of the categories. Excuse me. All right, if there's no questions, just put them on in as I'm going so I can see them pop up. So go ahead and ask away. So let's move into triathlon first. So with triathlon training, it's really important for athletes to work all 3 disciplines. I know this seems like, of course you should work all 3 disciplines, but what I tend to find is that athletes like to work what they're good at. So say you're a good runner, people tend to veer more towards running. If swimming is not your cup of tea, you're not going to spend as much time in the pool because it's not as fun. But what I would encourage you guys to do is I would encourage you guys to work all 3 sports and have specific weeks that you're going to work your limiters. I don't like the word weakness. I like the word limiter. So if swimming's a limiter, you might have certain blocks, weeks, or even months that you're going to spend on that limiter more so than the other things that you're good at. Because it's easy to work the things we're good at. It's hard to work the things that we're not good at. So I want you guys to think, how can I best work my limiters? How can I work them in? And making sure that you're spending at least equal time on those 3 disciplines, if not spending a little bit more time on the limiters, excuse me, at certain times of the year. And then kind of like one of my bigger points for triathletes is, even if your limiter is a swim, at certain points of the year, I want you guys to be focusing on having more bike mileage, because when it comes to triathlon, the bike is the kind of the most, you're gonna have the most distance on the bike. The majority of your race is gonna come from the bike. And so you're going to want to spend the most time on the bike. So typically for plans or coaching, unless the coach has a different kind of like philosophy, or maybe they're trying to work your limiter at that point, at least 50% of your training should be on the bike. So, just easy math, if you're training 10 hours a week, shooting for 5 hours on the bike is a good kind of baseline marker, just so that way you guys are spending enough time getting your legs ready to ride. Because when we look at triathlon, races they're not won or lost. I mean, like I said, they could be lost in the swim, but for the most part, the swim is the smallest portion. It's not as meaningful. Many athletes can have a little bit, slower swim and come back and still kind of kick butt in that bike and that run. So the swim is a little bit less important. The bike is the most important, because it is where we determine if we are going to overbike and then have a poor run, or if we're going to nail our bike, have a strong bike that leads into a good run. So making sure that you guys are having a good enough and big enough bike portion to your weeks is going to be the first step. Making sure that you guys are working within your especially your bike workouts and your run workouts, that you're having different types of workouts. So this will be in the guidebook, but having workouts that work the different energy systems like tempo, sweet spot, threshold, VO2 max. You want to be working all of these different energy systems, all of these different just kind of styles of workouts to get your body primed to race. Now, when we look at the run off the bike, this is where I tend to find most athletes do too much work in their training on trying to be faster during their week. They're doing a lot of speed work. They're doing a lot of high intensity. When it comes down to it on race day, you guys, typically your run is determined by how your bike went. So if you overbiked your bike, coming off of that bike, your run might end up being much slower than you were training, because you had overbiked that bike. So while it's important to work some speed on the run, I really tend to find that a lot of triathletes don't even need to work that much speed on the run. They need to work running well off the bike. They need to work on their bike fitness, which in turn makes you a stronger runner. And so that's where bricks will come in. This is my last point for just triathletes, is that if you want to have a strong run off the bike, you need to learn how to run off the bike using bricks, which a brick is a bike into a run. You could have a swim to bike brick. You could have other bricks, but in this case, I'm talking bike to run brick. So with the bike to run brick, you're running off the bike, and I would recommend at least having 1 brick a week. That would allow your body to it's a neurological thing. It's going to allow your brain to be like, this is what it's like to run off the bike. And it doesn't mean you have to spend 2 hours running off the bike. It just means you need to start getting your body used to doing a 10-minute run, 20-minute run, 30-minute run off the bike. And that will help you. And it's also a great way to be efficient with your training, because if you need to do a bike and a run workout, you can just do them back to back, potentially, depending on the situation. But you can do them back to back, and that's going to be much more time efficient. And you're going to be kind of getting that 2 birds with 1 stone. You're working your brick, you're working kind of that neurological adaptation, and you're also making it more time efficient. Okay, any questions with triathlon training specifically before I move into the run only training? I have a couple points on that for you guys. Anything for triathlon, you guys? I'm gonna go jump into running. So for my standalone runners, and oftentimes triathletes will say finish their season and then maybe jump into marathon training, or maybe they just want to switch to running, or I coach just plain old runners too. So with running, it's a little bit different from triathlon training. And so you want to have, whether you're a triathlete going into the run or you're just a runner, which is totally fine. I want you to think, they're different. It's a different, they're different physiologies. It's just a different way of training. So when we're run training, we're still going to have that periodized training. We're still going to have our base training. We're going to have a build. We're going to have a peak. We're going to have a taper. We're still going to work our, I'm sorry, I didn't mention this for a triathlon, but you're either going to have 3 weeks up and 1 week of recovery, or 2 weeks up and 1 week of recovery. And I want to just touch on that for a second. So with our masters athletes, or athletes that are more injury prone, I tend to do a 2 week up, 1 week down. Or if you're just like, hey, I'm not injury prone, hey, I'm 25 years old, then a 3 week up, 1 week recovery, it seems to be a really good progression for most athletes. So think to yourself, am I someone that tends to get injured? I'm a 55-year-old male that needs a little more recovery than I used to as a 25-year-old male. That's kind of, think about how much recovery you do need. Okay, so from a run standpoint, one of the biggest mistakes I see runners make is they don't follow that periodized schedule. They just go out and they run. And they might run every day, they might run every other day, they might not take recovery days. They might, a big one I see is they build every single week for their long run. So actually yesterday I was helping someone in the UK and training for a marathon, and she had showed me a plan that she wanted to follow, and I helped her to revamp it. And the plan actually had them running, it was 6 weeks in a row of runs over two hours. It was like 2:30, 2:45, 3:15, 2:45, 2:30. It was like 6 weeks in a row of big runs every week without any downtime, without any recovery, without any back off. And this is her very first marathon. So for you guys who are runners, first and foremost, the same rule applies that it does to triathlon, especially because the running is the most injury-inducing portion of running or triathlon. So you want to make sure that you're not just steadily building every single week without any downtime or recovery. And that doesn't mean that you take the entire week off. It just means that you back off. So say your long run was 2.5 hours, you might back it down to 1:45. So it's 3 hours, maybe you're, back it down to 2. You're just not going as long because your body doesn't need to be progressively pushed for 6 weeks in a row. I like to actually stagger and do my long runs. Sometimes I'll do 2 and then 2, like a 2 and then a 2:15, and then I'll back it off to like a 1:30. Or sometimes I'll do every other week. So it might be, if you're building like a 2 and then a 1:30, then a 2:15, and back to a 1:30, that's going to push your body enough to give you that training adaptation without causing a larger injury risk by progressively just doing every single week build. So that would be my caveat. If you're you run 10 marathons and your body can withstand running 3 hours for your long run every week for 6 weeks and you want to go for it, I still wouldn't recommend it, but you would have more of my blessing than a first-time marathoner or a second-time marathoner who's trying to, run a marathon, maybe as a time goal, but the main goal is injury-free for fun without, without getting injured, 4 weeks before their marathon. Okay, so I want you to think about the plan that you're using, making sure that it's following that periodized program from a runner standpoint, and that you're not just progressively building every single week without any downtime. That's kind of number one for runners. Number two, when I have runners that are kind of just talking about like, when do we add in speed work? When do we start to really do this more intense running? So one of my rules is that runners need to be at 20 miles a week of running before we physiologically even need to add in speed work. Because what I have found as a coach is that you will get a lot of training adaptations from consistently running, whether it's 3, 4, 5, 6 days a week, at least 20 miles total that week, before we start adding in speed work. I found that most athletes will stay more injury free if they have built up a very solid base of miles, kind of like, especially around that 20-mile a week range. And once you're at that 20-mile a week range, then I like to add in things like strides and fartleks, which is a Swedish word for speed play, which is where you're going hard, then recovery, hard, then recover. Then we can add in track intervals and hills. Things are going to be working your muscles in a different way, going to be stressing your cardiovascular system, but it also makes you more prone to injury. If you've built up your base and you're at that 20 miles a week, then, before you start any of those things, then you have a much less risk of injury, and your body has already started to just become that much more aerobically fit. So think about, where are you in your plan? Where are you, do you think you're doing too much speed work? Like, have you just started running and all of a sudden you're just like, I'm going to go to the track and do, track intervals, or, I'm going to be, jumping into this big program and ramping up really quickly. So kind of think about, where have you been training? What does your training plan look like? Does it seem like it's a scientifically sound program that's including the periodized training with the recovery, building your miles up, adding in those speed workouts and the intervals, even VO2 max above threshold runs? Like, those are all great, and you want to add those in, but only after you've established a full, complete training kind of base. Okay? So I'm trying to think if there was anything else that I wanted to touch on for runners. Yes, there was one more thing. So I have athletes that really do well with running 3 times a week, and I have athletes that really do well running 5 to 6 times a week. And this is a very personal choice. But I just want you to know, if you are someone that gets injured and you're running, say, 3 miles a week, sometimes actually running 6 days a week at lower miles will actually keep your body healthier over time. You're going to say do the same amount of miles. So say your goal is 18 miles this week. You can either do 3 runs of 6 miles or 6 runs of 3 miles. Some athletes find that they do better doing more runs, just less. And then some find that, no, the more I run, the more my body hurts. So I'm going to run less days at more miles as I'm running. So this is a very personal thing. So like for me, I'll use my husband and I as an example. My husband is someone who really excels at running nearly every day, lower miles. Whereas for me, the way my body was genetically built, I shouldn't be running every single day, even if it's lower miles. I need to be running, say, 3 days a week. So we've known this. I mean, we've been athletes for, my whole life, but my husband specifically, I think, started training harder probably maybe 12 years ago. So over the last, 12 to 20 years, we've determined that what's best for our physiology. So just know that just because you have a plan or a coach that tells you you have to run only 3 days a week, or you have to run 5 days a week, if you're finding it's not working for you, you can alter your plan and try a different kind of protocol for running. Just because something works for one athlete does not mean it's going to work for all athletes. Okay? So I think that's all I had for endurance training, kind of like my secrets as a coach, like what I have you guys as if you're my athletes or on the team, what you get from me, kind of how my brain works. So what questions do you guys have on endurance training, on designing a plan, putting it together? And if you have any other questions on any of the other days that came before, that is totally fine too. So anyone that's still on, because I know we've got a couple on, feel free to post those questions. I would love to answer any questions you guys have. And I actually talked less today. I think the last couple days I've been talking more than I thought I would. Hey, you guys, I don't see any questions coming through. So let me just tell you that tomorrow our call is at 10 a.m. Eastern, just like it was today. And we are talking about my favorite topic, which is race fueling. And it's something that a lot of athletes don't get right. And then it leads to a lot of heartache on race day because they've spent so much time and effort and money, getting to your A race, and then their day does not go as planned, typically because heat, humidity, hydration, sports nutrition. And so my goal for tomorrow is to really help you guys dial in how to make sure you have your own plan for your race day. Okay? So I'm super excited for tomorrow. Please join me live. If you're not going to be able to be live, that's great too. I will send out this video from tomorrow, and then you can let me know what questions you guys have. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later. Okay, bye.